Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative. I apologize for being a little bit late. These things are more complicated than they seem. My computer is literally melting down. That's how hot the story is tonight. It really is a very, very big show because we've not heard anyone from inside the intelligence community, past or present, come out and say what this man is about to say tonight on our air. It's remarkable, it's concerning, it's frightening. We can vouch for a lot of it. We can't vouch for all of it. We really are going to walk through this together with you tonight as we try to understand what this, former spy is going to say about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and the scheme that they have unleashed upon the world for almost 2 decades, maybe longer, which he claims involves compromising and blackmailing our politicians here in the United States, but elsewhere in the world. It's a remarkable interview. It's on tape, so I know what's coming up. But it's really interesting, and I need as much feedback as I can from you because it's a confusing world. You know, we don't know what's really going on in a world that is ruled by subterfuge and deception. We can't always tell what's real. Although I spent a lot of time figuring this one out, and along with Lincoln's Bible, who I appreciate your endless support in this, we're going to navigate this complicated story because it means something. It means something for our country. It means something for democracy. It means something for where we will go as a democracy in the future and what we will tolerate in our country. So it's now been 6 weeks, if you can believe it, almost 6 weeks, since Jeffrey Epstein was discovered in his jail cell. Well, his body was at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. And despite assurances from people like the Attorney General, Bill Barr, he's in charge of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, so it happened under his watch. He's also in charge of the Justice Department, so it's happening under his watch. He's also got a long history with Epstein and a long history with the people involved in Epstein's circle of influence. And yet he made us an assurance just after Epstein was found dead that this story was not going away and that the investigation would continue. Here's what he had to say.
But let me assure you that this case will continue on against anyone who was complicit with Epstein. Any co-conspirators should not rest easy. The victims deserve justice, and they will get it. But let me assure you that this case will continue on.
I think once is enough, Mr. Barr, but you get the general message. He came out and very forcefully said that this would be investigated. The death would be investigated as suspicious, which, it turns out they found it out to be a suicide. You'll hear from our guest tonight. He questions that. He questions whether it was really a suicide. And then, the investigation seems to have stumbled along. We've not heard anything new about any of the co-conspirators being charged. And maybe that's because the co-conspirators are too vast, too many to even arrest. And maybe none of them are even in this country. And we'll explain some of that as we go forward. Because today, we're going to try to reveal this missing piece of the puzzle that when you put that piece of the puzzle into your puzzle, you suddenly see the picture in full. And maybe this is that piece that you're looking for, that we've been looking for. As I said, you're going to be hearing from a former Israeli spy who says Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were blackmailing American politicians and public figures. And they were doing it for Israeli military intelligence. That's what he says. We've checked some of this out and we'll explain what we've been able to prove. But from our part of it, we're relaying what he said to us. We've checked out most of the story and we'll explain what we found that we haven't been able to check out. But these key facts are important. Here you've got a former Israeli military intelligence person, a senior spy, not just a run-of-the-mill spy, someone who's been in the intelligence ranks of the world for over 4 decades, someone who gets how this game is played. And he's coming on Narrative to share one key fact. And that is, 2 key facts actually, that Epstein and Maxwell were both Israeli spies working for Israeli military intelligence, and that they were running a blackmail scheme here in our country, in North America, targeting our politicians, our scientists, our academics. And they were doing it for military intelligence in Israel. This is a huge disclosure, huge bombshell, and I'm not asking you to take my word for it or his word for it. We're going to walk through this carefully and see what we can figure it out. Now, he claims that Epstein and Maxwell were deliberately targeting politicians and public figures. And he wasn't just they weren't just looking for compromising situations. If they wanted just run-of-the-mill dirty photos of a celebrity or a politician doing something they shouldn't have done, they could have got it in many other ways. What's so interesting about what they did is they specifically went after minors, underage girls mostly, and targeted them. And then they tried to get these politicians, lure them in, get them compromised with these underage girls. No one should be doing this, of course. I'm not justifying any of this, but this was in the old world, they used to say that the honey trap was the oldest trick in the book. But this isn't even a honey trap. This is a honey trap that's actually a criminal trap. That's a crime trap. It's a felony that they're trying to get these people on. And, if you're going to do that, if you're going to try so hard to get politicians in that kind of situation, you're going to want them to do some pretty big things for you, right? You're not going to just need that leverage if it's just asking for a donation to your charity. No, you're going to need that leverage because you're going to ask them to do some pretty big stuff. At least that's what you'd think would be happening. Otherwise, why would you spend the money? Why would you spend the time to pay for these girls, to go and find them, to discover them, to groom them? Why would you do that unless you had some big intention in mind? And so keep that in the back of your mind as we run through the story today. Now, I don't know if you saw this last night on NBC. It was an interesting special, well done to Dateline and Savannah Guthrie, who interviewed one of the victims. She interviewed actually several of them, but one of the victims, maybe we should call her an accuser rather than a victim, just in fairness to the thing that she has been through, which has been traumatic and difficult and horrible, but she has obviously been able to stand up against it. She is, her name is I'm sorry, I'll forget it. It's in my script here. I just can't find it. Guthrie is her last name. I can't believe I can't remember this. It'll come to me in a second. But what's interesting about her, she was originally under a different name in the original filing that she did. But she's one of the key Epstein accusers. And if you recall her story, what she did was she was lured in by Ghislaine Maxwell at Mar-a-Lago, of all places. And that's where she started a very long and tawdry relationship with Epstein and Ghislaine, where she became basically a sex slave for them. She got paid. There's no doubt about it. She got paid for a lot of the things that she did. And it's hard to tell whether any of it would have happened if it wasn't for the money. But she had her freedom. She could have left whenever she wanted, but there was a hold on her, or so she claimed, that made her stay. And what they did with her is beyond belief, because they trained her into becoming a slave that they could then lure these famous celebrities in. And the people that they lured in, they couldn't have gone bigger than a member of the royal family in the UK. That was Prince Andrew. And the stunning story she tells yesterday about how Ghislaine and Jeffrey were able to direct her into exactly what she should do with Andrew is remarkable. So I'm going to let you watch a little bit about what happened last night on the Dateline special, but I also want you to keep in mind that Dateline didn't give you the full story. Dateline did a very, very good job of explaining how a young girl was lured in by these rich people, how she was manipulated into becoming a sex slave and a honey trap, really, for them to lure in these rich, professional, successful politicians, public figures, scientists. But they didn't tell you the whole story, because when you look into her filing, into her affidavit, the real story is there. And in that affidavit, she filed this, I think it was 2015 is when she originally filed it. She's very clear about what she thought was happening. She thought it was a blackmail scheme. She thought that Jeffrey Epstein was doing all this so he could get something on his friends. So he had a hold over them. So, as he said to her, that he had his friends in his pocket. That's what he said to her. That's why he spent all this money. When she returned from that first trip with Prince Andrew, she got paid $15,000. That's a lot of money And on top of spending a trip to fly her to London and back and forth, and God knows what they spend over there. So you got to believe that this was a heavy investment for someone who's, of questionable finances. No one knows where Jeffrey Epstein got his money from. Truly, nobody knows. Anyhow, here's a look at Guthrie's interview from Dateline, but also a look at these allegations she first made when she first filed an affidavit against Epstein, and she talked about this being a blackmail scheme.
Last month, New York Times columnist James Stewart wrote that Epstein told him last year that he had dirt on his famous friends, including details of their sexual proclivities and recreational drug use. Stewart's reporting backs up the claims of Virginia Giffrey, who claims Epstein and Maxwell made her their sex slave. In 2015, Giffrey said she believed prosecutors had videos and photos with her as an underage girl having sex with Epstein's powerful friends.
Prince Andrew came to her house.
Last night on NBC, Giffrey revealed one of those powerful friends was Prince Andrew.
We leave Club Tramp, and I hop in the car with Ghislaine and Jeffrey, and Ghislaine said he's coming back to the house, and I want you to do for him what you do for Epstein. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that even royalty were involved.
In a 2015 affidavit, Giffrey claimed Epstein told her he set up his friends with minors so that they would owe him. They would be in his pocket, and he would have something on them. Giffrey also said that Ghislaine Maxwell had a large collection of child pornography that she had made of the underage girls. She also says that Epstein required her to describe sex with these politicians, bankers, and celebrities that she was directed to have sex with, presumably so that he could potentially blackmail them.
Ghislaine woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today." I didn't know at that point that I was going to be trafficked to that prince.
Just think about those words, trafficked to that prince. Now, how do you get access to a man like Prince Andrew? I have no idea. But the fact that she was trafficked to him as a minor in order to entrap him in committing a crime, that really is what it appears to be. Otherwise, why go through this whole thing? And keep in mind, this took place 18 years ago. She is now, today, 35 years old. And so for the last, until his death, let's say, 18 years, these guys have been at it. Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein have continued the system of entrapment, a system of exploitation, a system of raping these girls, of putting them in compromising situations, of turning them into sex slaves. And now on top of it, it appears that maybe the reason they were doing it was in order to blackmail these politicians, leaders, public figures in our society. And on top of that, they were allowed to get away with it all. They were allowed by our justice system, by whoever the people who determine whether you get a non-prosecution agreement or not. They were allowed to get away with that. Because remember, Alex Acosta, who was the Labor Secretary and also the state prosecutor in the original Epstein case was tried in 2008 or came to court in 2008. Alex Acosta later reported to the Trump transition. Hello, Alex. Oh my God. Alexa's here, by the way. I'm not alone. Thank you, Alexa. I'm sure you're listening in. I meant Alex Acosta, not Alexa. But Alex Acosta was pretty clear when he was asked by the Trump transition team whether or not there would be any difficulty with his confirmation because of the Epstein case, because of what had happened in the Epstein case. And he very clearly told them, as is according to the Daily Beast, you'll recall this article, he told them this. He had been told to cut a non-prosecution deal with Epstein's lawyers in 2008. Now, he had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. I have to take his word for it. We have to take his word for it because we have nothing else to go on. But someone in our government said this systematic rape can continue. This abuse of these teenagers can continue. This potential bribery, that can continue as well, because this guy and this woman work for an intelligence agency. Now, probably not an intelligence agency in the United States. That doesn't make that much sense at all. But we know, I know, because we've been able to track this down, that Jeffrey Epstein was an agent for military intelligence in Israel. We know this. And when you look at that, it certainly lines up with what Mr. Acosta was telling the Trump transition team. He said they were intelligence and to leave him alone, and we know that Epstein was part of the intelligence community in Israel, part of military intelligence in Israel. So we've proven two things. I don't think we've proven two things, but let me say this. There's a strong perception, at least from Guthrie, that this whole scheme was a blackmail scheme, that she was put up into those positions because these guys were being blackmailed, that Epstein wanted some hold over them. We know that. We know that Acosta has said, these guys told me to lay off because they were intelligence. We've been able to prove through multiple sources that Epstein is Israeli military intelligence. And now tonight, we're going to introduce you to a man who is a former military intelligence asset. Not only an asset, I should say he was a spy handler, one of the biggest spy handlers for military intelligence. He's no longer there with them, but he's the real deal. I'll tell you why in a minute. You'll learn about his history. Now, he's come to us to get on the record because no one else has come on the record to say this guy's a military intelligence asset. He's coming to us to talk about what these guys have been up to, why they did what they did. I can only take his word for it because I don't have any other information other than what I've described for you today. But this guy's the real deal. His name is Ari Ben-Menashe. You might recognize the name because he was a big deal in Iran-Contra, I would say. Maybe not in the best way, but he was one of the people who was involved in that massive arms deal, in the 1980s when the Israelis particularly were funding the Iranians in their war against Iraq. And you might recall the United States didn't mind that. They even participated a little bit. And together, the Israelis and the Americans sent over $130 million worth of arms to the Iranians, which I'm sure they're very thankful for. The bottom line is this guy was the real deal operator back then. It's during that time, and we're talking about 1980, early 1980s, that he met Jeffrey Epstein. And he met Jeffrey Epstein because he was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein by Robert Maxwell. And Robert Maxwell was the spy master, or at least the spy that Ari Ben-Menashe was handling. And if you talk about famous spies in Israel's history or any history, Ari Ben-Menashe's guy, Robert Maxwell, was about the biggest as you can get. He was a famous British publisher. He ran the Daily Mirror. He was larger than life in many ways. He was, a big guy. But he also, did many things, including some say maybe helped the end the Soviet Union. Other people criticize him for a lot of the things he did to his papers. He basically bankrupted his papers by spending their pension schemes. He also maybe leaked very sensitive information to the Russians and to the Israelis. But these guys were big deal intelligence assets. And he started off as a Soviet spy. He worked for the KGB. And as often happens, actually, there's a bit of crossover between the Soviet KGB world or the Russian world and the Israeli world. He landed up becoming much more of an asset for the Israelis, and in fact died maybe at the hands of Mossad, who many people say he had crossed the line. He was threatening to reveal some of the secrets, and he just became uncontrollable. So the Mossad actually are said to have eliminated him. Can't confirm that, but we suspect that could be the case. It's certainly what two authors, Thomas and Gordon, wrote in the book Super Spy. But Ari also met Ghislaine through Robert Maxwell. Ghislaine is his daughter, of course. It turns out that Ghislaine and Jeffrey have been having a thing for a lot longer than people imagined. We've been told only that Ghislaine and Jeffrey sort of started seeing each other when they moved to the United States in 1991. But as you're about to hear from Ari Ben-Menashe, their romance started way, way earlier. And it was Robert Maxwell, the famous spy, who introduced Ari Ben-Menashe to Jeffrey Epstein, who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Israeli military intelligence in Israel, and who introduced all of them to a very different world that he embarked on as he changed the rules for being a spy, and for how the world viewed Israel's spy services. Because until then, there wasn't really much thought about Israel spying on America, you know. But from his arrival, Pollard, Promise, all these other things that happened, Iran-Contra, they started piling up. And Israel's very aggressive stance on using its secret service around the world, you know, has led some to believe that we've reached the point of no return almost. But I'm stepping ahead of ourselves because I want to get to the interview, and I'm yabbering away because I'm, you know, passionate and excited about this topic. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to Ari Ben-Menashe. So you have to wind your mind back 40 years. It's hard to imagine that a story that's happening today, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, still has the same players as were around 40 years ago in another big story. But that's in fact exactly what happened. So suspend your disbelief, if you will. Let's go back to September 1980. I'll explain to you who Ari Ben-Menashe is through this video. But I should also point out that he is the real deal. I'll explain why in a second. And in the meantime, take a look at this video. I think it's this one, 1980.
Deep in Iranian territory, Iraqi armor chalks up fresh successes on the battlefield.
It became known as the Iran-Iraq War. The United States supported Iraq. Israel secretly supported Iran. Israel wanted to sell weapons to the Iranians, and the Reagan administration agreed to let them. Ari Ben-Menashe was Israel's point man on the covert arms smuggling operation. He set up shop in London and recruited the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror, Nicholas Davies, and the paper's publisher, Robert Maxwell, to his team. Both men had the perfect cover for conducting arms deals while doing their day jobs. Together, they formed a front company called Aura and transferred hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to the Iranians in secret, until reporters found out and gave the world the Iran-Contra scandal.
Easy to follow, isn't it? It's a very complicated story. I mean, I've tried as best as I can to give you the key points, but because I know it's this complicated, here's a little. You haven't heard me there. Now you can hear me, I think. This is one of the difficulties I have right now, is I have no way of monitoring what's going on. So if anything isn't working, I'll do the show again. Don't worry. Don't worry. If you guys are having any issues, or those of you who know how to text me. I hope everything's working out fine. Let me catch you up. Here's the All in the Family chart. So we got Robert Maxwell, famous spy. He was a media baron. There's really no other way to describe him. He was the kind of person, you know, you think about Rupert Murdoch as the kind of guy that Robert Maxwell was. He believed more in himself than anything else, but he was also pretty much a criminal. He was a huge Zionist, believed in Israel, and supported Israel in many ways. Loved the idea of Gorbachev and opening up the Soviet Union. He was a KGB spy who tried to steal secrets from the United States and smuggle products into the Soviet Union. He really is, you know, a larger-than-life kind of mythical character. And, you know, surrounding him are even, you know, other larger-than-life characters. Ari Ben-Menashe, you're about to hear him talk about what his views are on Ghislaine Maxwell and on Jeffrey Epstein. But Ari Ben-Menashe also has a really storied career, who, you know, 40 years of being inside Israeli military intelligence and then being outside. Today, he's a consultant for some interesting countries. Up until recently, it was Robert Mugabe's consultant in Zimbabwe. Certainly there's some questions about his choices, but, you know, he's had a thriving career all the way through, except for 13 months when he spent it, which he spent in jail. And those 13 months were courtesy of the Iran-Contra affair. Now, he wasn't ever found guilty, but he was acquitted but he did spend 13 months, and he goes into that in the interview. And then, of course, there's Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's one of several children that Robert Maxwell had, and they all went off to do different things, some of them in the spy industry, some of them not. But Ghislaine is the one that certainly has grabbed the headlines and continues her father's sort of dark arts, whatever, craftsmanship that she has. And Ghislaine met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 80s. We can reveal to you now for the first time. Up until now, the story has been that they met in the 90s, but they met in the 80s in London in the context of this Iran-Iraq war, in the context of the Iran-Contra scandal. And then you also see Ehud Barak there. And Ehud Barak is interesting because he has been Epstein's friend, or was Epstein's friend, for 18 years as well, for as long as this scheme has been going on, and was photographed going into Epstein's home, but was also a business partner of Epstein's in what can only be described as a sort of an intelligence front business that the Israeli intelligence community has put up. All right, I've spoken too much. I was going to show you that really Ari is who he says he is, because look, I had to look it up just to make sure that he's got some real credentials. These are his reference letters from his colleagues and his officers in the Israeli Defense Force. He's not lying about who he says he is. Part of me wishes he was lying, because this story is truly disturbing. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about it. I want you to listen to it as carefully as you can. I'll be back to tell you my thoughts in a second. I went to Montreal because when I got the call from Ari that he was going to talk to me, I'd been badgering the guy, badgering him, because I really wanted to know what was going on. And he came through. He said, I can meet you within 48 hours. Come to Montreal. I'll talk to you. But you got to do it in person. I'm not talking to you on the phone. I'm not getting eavesdropped by anybody. Can I bring a camera? No, you cannot bring a camera. No. Can I bring an audio recording device? Can I at least record the interview? Yes, I could bring an audio recording device. So what you're going to hear is just the audio of a conversation. It lasted 2 hours. A lot of the stuff I'm not really prepared to air because I haven't been able to verify it. And I feel a little nervous about putting him on with unverified claims. The stuff you are going to hear, though, mostly the broad outskirts of it, we think are verified. Some of it is simply not possible to verify. But I hope you'll use your judgment as you listen to this. I know you will. This is a significant interview. What he is about to tell you that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have done, this is far more significant than the very significant crimes that have happened to these women, to these young girls. This is significant because it hits at the heart of who we are as a country. It hits at the heart of what we want to do with corruption. And it hits at, how we view justice in this world. So again, this is his thoughts. I have not been able to verify everything here, but I want you to listen to it. And we'll be back right afterwards and talk about it then.
Except what happened was that Maxwell introduced him to us, and he wanted us to accept him as part of our group. I'm not denying that we were, at the time, the group, there was Nick Davies, there was Maxwell, there was myself and our team from Israel. We were doing what we were doing.
On September the 22nd, Iraqi planes attacked Mehrabad Airport outside.
Selling arms via Israel too.
There was a project. It wasn't selling arms.
Right.
It was transferring arms to Iran.
So we're talking about Iran-Contra, basically.
Yeah.
We're talking about that same arms deal as Iran-Contra.
Israel was very concerned about the Iraqis taking over southern Iran.
So Maxwell introduces you. He says, here's this young guy.
Yeah.
And did he go by the name Jeffrey Epstein, or did he go by a different name?
I remember Epstein and Jeff Epstein.
Okay. Because he had a different passport that he was traveling in and out
that's
of.
right. But that came later.
Okay. So he says to you, here's this guy Jeffrey Epstein, who I know from around.
And your Israeli bosses have approved.
Oh, okay.
Already approved.
So it came down from up above. So what did he do? Can you say what he did for you? Like what kind of work did you guys do together?
No, he didn't do anything.
Oh, so you met him and that was it?
I met him a few times in Maxwell's office. That was it.
And did he do any arms deals for anybody else that you were aware of?
Not that I know.
Because there's the, I guess it was an
He didn't.
MI5
He
operation.
wasn't very competent. He didn't seem to be a competent guy. He didn't seem to be. But he was a good-looking guy. And Miss Maxwell.
Ghislaine, yeah.
Fell for him.
Early, in the 80s.
Early. How old was she?
She was young.
Yeah.
But most of the reporting about her and him only started in 1991 when they got to the United States.
Yeah, I realized that, but they were already.
They're already dating. So he was.
Call it dating, whatever.
So they were part of he was part of the family business.
Yeah, and Maxwell sort of started liking him, and my theory is that Maxwell, because Maxwell felt that this guy is going for his daughter.
Right.
He felt.
He felt like he could bless him with some work and help him out, and like he felt paternal for him. Was she part of the business too? Was she involved in what you were doing over there?
No. But later on,
Yeah.
she got involved with Israeli intelligence together with him,
Right.
but not in this arms deal in Iran or business.
Would you say she was an agent as well? Was she
Yes,
someone
yes.
working for Israeli intelligence?
Oh, definitely.
Military intelligence as well?
Yes.
And when that happens, because I have no idea how that world works, so I'm learning a little
It
bit.
happened by accident.
Do you get orders and you have to do certain things, or is it more like...
No, you get projects. What really happened, my take on it, and later thing, is that these guys were seen as agents, but they weren't really competent to do very much. And so they found a niche for themselves, blackmailing American and other political figures.
For the Israelis?
Yeah.
So it's hard for people to understand why Israel would want to get blackmail on
You're kidding
an
me.
American.
That-
I'm asking a question that I can answer it probably, but for most people it's hard for them to think about Israel as being blackmailing their leaders in the United States. It's a very...
It was quite their MO. See, sleeping around is not a crime. Maybe embarrassing, but not a crime. But sleeping with underage girls is a crime.
It was a crime in 2000 as well, when they let him off
And
that.
then it's always. So
Yeah.
he made sure these girls are underage.
Sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Daily Mail published pictures of him entering Epstein's New York residence in January 2016. Around the same time, several young women tied to the billionaire also came by.
And why do you think Ehud Barak spent all these years associating with this man?
After a while, what Mr. Epstein was doing was collecting intelligence on people in the United States. So if you want to go to the U.S., if you're a high-profile politician, you want to know information about people.
So he was getting that information. He was getting the dirt.
Huh?
He was receiving the dirt from Epstein, basically.
That's right.
I heard that one of the things that Epstein liked about the relationship with military intelligence is the ability to access all this very high-tech spy gear, which he was able to use.
Yeah, I'm listening stuff, sure.
So was Epstein and Barak, is that what they were doing, basically? He was part of the blackmailing scheme?
Epstein was blackmailing people.
But was Barak part of that blackmailing scheme?
He would benefit.
He'd benefit from it. Was he providing technology for it?
He was too high up to do it directly himself, but he would give the go-ahead.
A special report from ABC News.
News for you. Sources telling ABC News that Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide overnight at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan.
I spent 11 months and 3 weeks in the same place Epstein was and it would have been impossible to commit suicide. Impossible.
Oh, so you were at MCC in New
I
York?
was in MCC
Oh, wow.
in New York, same place.
No one commits suicide at MCC. It's happened.
Impossible.
Right.
Impossible.
Right. So who did it then?
Huh?
Who did it?
I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is it's impossible. I mean, there's nowhere you can hang yourself in the cells. Now,
Well, they say off the bunk bed, right?
Huh?
They say he tied himself onto the bunk bed and leaned forward. And how do you die that way? It's not even.
I don't know.
It's not
Maybe
feasible.
he was specially gifted, but I doubt it.
The other rumor is that he was given space to commit suicide, that he was sort of, and I don't know if this happens in agent world or in espionage, where you're like, you're going to have to kill yourself because you've lost usefulness. You become a liability.
I have theories about who wanted him dead. Probably there were quite a number of people in the States wanted him dead, but I would think mainly the Israelis.
Mainly. I mean, when you look at it,
Yeah.
they have the most to lose from all of this coming out.
Because you really didn't want the stories to come out about how they were blackmailing American politicians.
No.
No, you certainly do not. You certainly do not want to have those stories come out. And still, as I'm listening to Ari Ben-Menashe telling it again there, it's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom that the Israelis would have such a complicated compromat factory targeting our politicians, targeting our leaders, our scientists, our academics. But the facts are just beginning to gather in a certain way that it's hard to look at it in any other way. It's hard to understand why Epstein and Maxwell would have done this. Why would they have gone through all this effort if there wasn't, firstly, a lot of money to be spent doing it, but also if you had some sort of national goal in order to try and exert your pressure, to exert pressure on politicians in America who might be drifting away from your national interest, maybe then you can see how it's done. But it's still very hard to imagine how, my birthplace is Israel, and it's troubling for me especially, but also I'm sure for everyone who believes in the state of Israel and who believes that there is some sort of shared value or shared values between these two countries that doesn't get to the point where you're committing crimes for that country against your allies. It's just it's astonishing to think about all of this, because it's just shatters your illusions about where we are as a country, as a world, where we are with our alliances. And so I don't want to say that everything Ari Ben-Menashe is saying is gospel, because I don't know that everything he's saying is gospel. But I do know, multiple sources now have confirmed that Jeffrey Epstein worked for Israeli military intelligence. We do know that he met Ghislaine in the UK while he was working on another arms deal for the British arms dealer, Douglas Lease. We know that as to be true as well. So the fact that he was working on arms deals there, and Ari Ben-Menashe was working on arms deals as well, as was Robert Maxwell, and the fact that they are, their location and their timing coincide, I mean, it certainly does lend credence to that. It's hard to look at this entire operation and not see, Robert Maxwell is connected to all these people. And if he's connected to all these people, and he is himself an Israeli military asset, and not just your typical intelligence asset, Robert Maxwell was the kind of guy who didn't bother with the middling classes. He didn't bother with the officers or the directors at military intelligence. He would have gone directly to the top. And in fact, I've seen it in many places that he would call Shamir directly and make those deals. So, that direct line to the top of Israel's political class, to the top of the military class, is again, I think, another piece of evidence that you can't ignore. And she is who she is. She is his daughter. And she, for whatever reason, has chosen to take this path of of criminality along with Jeffrey Epstein. And it's hard to think that that's actually has anything to do with wanting to love him or loving him, because I don't think that they are in love, because they seem to have, man, no, I'm not going to judge whether they're in love with each other or not, but I'm going to say they don't look like your typical relationship. So what is holding that bond together? It must be a business interest of some sort. And I think in this case, the business interest is this attempt to run a compromat machine to leverage against American politicians and America's public opinion these horrible acts that are crimes on their own. They're just crimes, but then on top of that, to layer that on as blackmail on top of that crime, they're sort of, it's so dark. It's such a dark place to go. So those are the things we know. We know that he was military intelligence. Jeffrey Epstein was military intelligence. We know that he and Ghislaine met in the UK. We know that Robert Maxwell is connected to all these people. We know that Ari Ben-Menashe is saying what Virginia Giuffre is saying, that there was a blackmail scheme, that this is not just some sort of random, I'm going to get some dirty pictures of someone and sell it to a magazine, that there is a legitimate big blackmail scheme going on. And whether that was for monetary reasons or for political reasons, we don't know yet. Maybe for both. But it makes this story, which is already a huge, sensational, unbelievably dark story, even more intriguing and even more depressing, because, these are our allies. And I said to myself, well, Israel wouldn't do this. Israel wouldn't do this. But Israel has spied on America before. They've done things before, like the Pollard affair, like Promise. They've done things that have just, have caught a lot of us by surprise, because we didn't think that that's what allies do to each other. But apparently I'm naive. Ari Ben-Menashe was like, what? You kidding me? Of course everyone wants blackmail on politicians. It's what people do. It's the MO. But apparently I'm Pollyanna-ish. There's one other thing that I really want to bring to light here, and that is Bill Barr, who remains the guy in charge of investigating all of this. Bill Barr also was the cleanup guy. He was the cover-up guy for Iran-Contra. Not only that, he knew Jeffrey Epstein because from very, very long time ago, because he taught, Jeffrey Epstein taught at his father's school. Bill Barr was also a lawyer at the same firm that had Jeffrey Epstein's defense lawyer was part of. Guess who also was there? Alex Acosta was there. And then, of course, the fact that they knew each other for so long, the fact that there's this this connection through this legal firm is just one piece of it. But there is also this nagging cover-up feeling around Bill Barr that you can't seem to shake, that everything he does seems to be designed to hide the facts from the public, whether it's Mueller or it's Epstein. And then the failures really do anything about it. As Ben-Menashe was saying there, it's super unlikely that Epstein just committed suicide in a prison cell where you can't really commit suicide. Could he have committed suicide by leaning off a bunk and tying a noose around his neck? It's possible, I guess, but it's so unlikely that would happen, along with two guards falling asleep at the same time, along with being left alone when he shouldn't have been left alone. He just off suicide watch. These things do not add up. They do not add up. And, maybe in his heyday, Mr. Barr was okay coming out and telling the world the way things should be, covering up a story, letting the TV networks run with that story, and getting away with it. But we're not in that world anymore. We're not fools. I mean, you can see that this man has been covering up things all the way from Iran-Contra onwards. That he covered up the Promise affair. And by the way, the Promise affair is, guess who? It's Robert Maxwell again. It's Ari Ben-Menashe again. So he cannot oversee Jeffrey Epstein's investigation. He has to recuse himself. It just makes no sense that he's allowed to stay on top of this investigation. And yet, originally he did recuse himself, and then he unrecused himself because obviously someone told him he can't do that. Who is telling Bill Barr he has to stay on this? Who has that kind of influence to go to our leaders in government, so many of them, and make these decisions for them, or tell them to make these decisions which seem even on the very surface of them, just unbelievable. That's my dog, by the way, who's really upset because I was meant to take him out for a walk several hours ago, but I've been working and he's letting his displeasure be known. So I apologize for that. Almost there, almost there. I got to say, this one thing is really important to me because, look, this. You could say this is about a bunch of politicians being bad. You can say this is about a bunch of spies blackmailing people. You can say all of those things, but it's not just that. You know, these politicians make up policy. They make up the rules for our country. They determine how justice is run in our country. So if there's compromise out there that is being used against them, so they vote a certain way, so they pass certain policies, so they look the other way when a crime is committed, it's unacceptable. It's not possible for us to continue building the kind of country we want, building the kind of democracy we want, if this kind of corruption is just sitting there in our system, rotting away, eating away at our futures, eating away at our children's futures. And so I'm not here saying that what Ari Ben-Menashe said is 100% correct. I don't know that. But I think he's got credentials. I think he knows. He was there. He knows all these people. He was in the room with Jeffrey Epstein and Robert Maxwell and Ghislaine Maxwell 40 years ago. He knows how Israeli military intelligence works. He knows how these things happen, and he knows what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. He spent 13 months in jail for doing some pretty crazy stuff for the Israelis. So I'm inclined to believe him to a certain extent. Now, I'm not saying, hey, it's wrapped up and done, let's move on, we know what the story is. Clearly it's not. But we as a society need to take a bigger stand in trying to figure out what this is. And, you know, there is this thing where you just don't talk about intelligence agencies. And I know every single media outlet out there must have an inkling of the same thing that I've been able to find out, but is refusing to cover it. In fact, I will tell you, because it's frustrating to me that I held back this interview for over a month now, because I was working on a deal with the network to try and work with them to properly investigate every avenue of this, so we would have the full story. And you know what? We had a shoot date booked. We had at least agreement on the term deals, and they pulled it at the last minute because of budgetary reasons. Now, I'm not that expensive, people, and I gotta say one other thing: the story is worth it. And Renzi, come on, buddy, shush. This is so funny. This is why you know I'm live. So, you know, I think it's, if you're a journalist at a newspaper, if you're a journalist at one of these networks, can you please ask yourselves why you're a journalist? Why are you a journalist if you can't cover stories like this? If you can't look at these very serious questions that are being asked about how our system is corrupted, why are you doing what you're doing? And if someone around you is telling you that you shouldn't be covering a story in the way that you've been wanting to cover a story, or someone is standing in the way of the truth, you have to stand up for that. That's what being a journalist is about. That's what we need to see. And so I know journalists follow me, and I'm sure journalists are watching right now. Go in tomorrow and ask about this story. Put your resources at your network at play, and let's find out what happened. Because this, whitewashing of life, this whitewashing of history is not helping anybody. We've had 40 years of deceit, maybe, in terms of story after story after story that's just not been completely true. And how, are we going to stand for it any longer? Why are we going to stand for it? It doesn't have to be this way. The truth is what sets you free. The truth is what gives us our futures, and the truth is what gives our children their futures. And I sense that I've been on a soapbox. My dog needs to go for a walk. I've been staring at this computer for way too long, so I might be getting a little delirious. But I want to thank you for watching tonight. Patreon.com/narrative. Patreon.com/narrative is where you can subscribe, become a member, do whatever you'd like. Tell me what you think about this show and any other show. This has been an exhausting process, and if I'm a little delirious, it is because it's been weeks of work, because verifying what we could put on the air, thinking about the consequences. Again, my very sincere thanks to Lincoln's Bible, who is a must follow if you're even interested in where the world is going and the corruption in our world. Lincoln's Bible is the place to check it out on Twitter. There's a podcast of this, so if you loved it the first time, you get to see it again. You get to see even Renzi's little appearances here, where he gets to yap away and demand his walk. And I want to thank Ari Ben-Menashe for, it's a lot for someone like him to go on the record, to say the things he has said on the record. He knows that's a heavy burden to carry. And whether he's telling us the truth, telling us half the truth, or lying. I don't think he's lying. I think that there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. I think he also might not want to share some things. I want to thank him for having the guts to come out and to talk to me, and for sitting down with me in Montreal for 2 hours. It was super fascinating. There's more to the interview, and I'll keep unpacking it for you in the near future. I've taken up way too much of your time tonight, and I thank you very much for joining us, or joining me on Narrative, and hopefully we'll be back soon. And I have something to say goodbye with. Don't I? Any of these things to say goodbye? I don't know. It's been a trying day because all my computer stuff has not been totally functioning. Here it is. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night and the rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.